And I give the call to the member for Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and good evening. Deputy Speaker, I will not attempt to stand in the way of this bill, and I certainly won't be calling a division, but I would like to take this opportunity to voice some concerns that I do have with the bill, and I think I speak for many Australians who would share these views. First and foremost, I disagree in principle with the whole idea of what would amount to indefinite mandatory detention. And in extreme circumstances, that's what this bill would allow, that someone who has had their visa cancelled and for whatever reason is unable to be returned to their country of origin could be held in immigration detention for the rest of their days. And I do want to put it on the public record, Deputy Speaker, that I strongly disagree with that as a matter of principle. I also disagree with the whole notion of us disrespecting the ruling and the intent of the federal court. It is poor practice, Deputy Speaker, that whenever the federal court rules against the government, I think it's poor practice that the government then just keeps changing the law until it finds a workaround of the federal court. I also disagree strongly in principle with the idea of retrospectivity. Retrospectivity clearly, as a matter of high principle, should be avoided at all costs and only be used in the most extreme of circumstances. And of course, Deputy Speaker, indefinite mandatory detention is at odds with numerous international agreements which this country has signed up to in good faith. And one of those international agreements, which I often refer to in this court, and I will again, is the Rome Statute, where it is explicitly detailed that it is a crime against humanity to hold anyone in detention indefinitely. And that, of course, as I've remarked already, would be allowed for under this bill if it should become law. It's also an unreasonable extension of the power of the state. And of course, over the last 20 years or so, Deputy Speaker, there have been countless laws made in this place when it comes to immigration and immigration detention. Probably the most dramatic and memorable of those laws was the excision of Australian offshore territories and islands from our migration zone. I mean, I think to this day is just the most bizarre, and it would be laughable if it wasn't so wrong, decision made in this place some years ago. And I remember a cartoon in one of the newspapers where it had the immigration minister at the time standing next to Uluru and saying, well, they touch the rock, they can stay. It was funny in some ways, but very, very sad and very, very true in other ways as far as the point it was making. And I would take this opportunity to, Deputy Speaker, when talking about the overreach of the power of the state. It's not just, of course, with immigration matters, but in so many other matters, most obviously national security, where now almost 100 different laws have been made by this parliament since the 9/11 terrorist attacks, many of which have been quite unnecessary and very worrying extensions of the power of the state. Deputy Speaker, it's not like we don't have alternatives to what we're about to decide upon in this place. And it's as recently as February this year that I introduced into the parliament a private member's bill, the Ending Indefinite and Arbitrary Immigration Detention Bill 2021, which received no support from the government nor the alternative government. And I will take this opportunity, Deputy Speaker, to remind honourable members of that bill, because it just goes to show there are viable alternatives to the way we detain people in this country. That bill, Deputy Speaker, would, if it was ever to become law, it would abolish unlawful mandatory detention of asylum seekers, refugees and non-citizens, and, by the way, would, in doing so, have the effect of ending offshore detention. And I do note, Deputy Speaker, that in the budget last night there was even more money to be thrown at increasing the capacity of the Christmas Island detention facility. I mean, how many billions of dollars after billions of dollars is this country going to throw at our offshore detention before we realise we've got to find better and more humane and lawful, in international law, ways of dealing with irregular immigration? The bill, Deputy Speaker, provides that community alternatives to immigration detention will always be preferred to detention behind wire and bars. The bill ensures that those in alternatives to immigration detention have full access to housing and financial support and have the right to work and to education, healthcare and other government services, as required under international law. Deputy Speaker, the bill that I introduced earlier this year, the alternative to what we're talking about tonight in many circumstances or many cases, includes specific conditions on how and why a person can be detained. It disallows long-term and arbitrary detention by setting limited time frames to ensure that an individual's detention period is as short as possible. The bill would remove the abhorrent and tortuous conditions that detainees currently experience by ensuring their access to information and services. Importantly, every decision under my bill, the alternative to tonight in many cases, the alternative would allow that every decision is subject to independent oversight and prompt review, not at the whim of the minister of the day. And sure, the ministers of the day will often be, find people and make sound decisions, but we should never have in place laws that would allow some ministers to act improperly. Deputy Speaker, the bill that I'm referring to is urgently needed, and I think when we come in here and debate what we're debating tonight, a bill that would legalise under Australian law indefinite arbitrary detention, we see again tonight very, very clearly how important alternatives are, how we should be coming in here and debating them. I can't believe that the government has not even allowed the debate of my bill that would provide an alternative to arbitrary indefinite detention. Let's not forget that arbitrary immigration detention, as practiced in this country, as legalised tonight, is immoral and illegal under international law. It is immoral in that we have a moral obligation to give people protection, to hear their claims and to give them refuge if their claims are accurate. If someone is found to be a refugee, we should give them permanent refuge in this country and access to all of the services and opportunities that are enjoyed by the rest of us. It is illegal to have indefinite mandatory detention because it's in contravention of numerous international agreements. I mean, sure, tonight we might legalise something in this country under Australian law, but we will be at odds with so many international agreements that the members of this House in years gone by have debated, scrutinised, signed and ratified in good faith. Agreements like, obviously, the Refugee Convention, the Refugee Protocol, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Optional Protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and of course the Rome Statute, which I've already referred to, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'll close there. I've made my point. And really I'm talking to matters not just of international law, but also to matters of high principle. That it is wrong in principle to be prepared to and to legalise and to go ahead and to detain people indefinitely in this country arbitrarily without trial. I mean, yes, Deputy Speaker, to be fair to the government and through you to the Speaker, yes, genuine efforts to safeguard against people being sent back to harm should be welcomed, and that point has been made by other speakers tonight. But such safeguards must be part of changes to stop people languishing in indefinite detention. And really, this bill is targeted at giving the government more power to detain refugees and to hold them in detention indefinitely. That's the bottom line, Deputy Speaker. Indeed, this bill will make the